In Matthew 26, verse 30, it says, "And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives."
And the clock is ticking. The wheels are in motion, events are underway, like grains of sand continuing to slowly fall through an egg timer, or the pieces on a chessboard moving into place, moment following moment, as individuals began to take up their positions, all ready to follow the paths set out before them, as they each are going to fulfill their part in the story that is unfolding, working towards the crescendo that is coming, because the clock is ticking. In many ways, I wonder whether that might capture something of Holy Week for us. This relentless storyline, if you will, that just moves from one point to the next. Maybe we know it so well. We've celebrated and remembered it over many, many years. Maybe almost going through the motions in some respects. But this unstoppable tale, this scene that follows scene, that follows scene, that follows scene. We know where it began on Sunday as Jesus entered Jerusalem. We know where it's going to end come Sunday on Easter Day. Second of the 4 days that we're reflecting on over this Easter period isn't a day that runs from midnight to midnight, because the second day in this series actually begins really some point in the afternoon or the early evening of that night that Jesus was betrayed. And it carries right through the coming hours, through the night, into what is known as Good Friday. At this point, though, as Emma read a moment ago, Matthew 26, when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Having celebrated together, they made their way from that upper room. And as I was thinking about this, although we may have a very linear view of the Easter narrative, there would have been a whole range of things going on. And all simultaneously, different people moving into position, various threads weaving together to create the full account that we know. I mean, an obvious place to start would be with the disciples. They've just celebrated the Passover meal together. They've just watched Jesus break bread, symbolizing, he said, his body broken for them. They've just seen him lift a cup, symbolizing, he said, his blood poured out for the forgiveness of sins. And then they've headed on their way to the Mount of Olives. And as they're going, I'm sure there would have been questions that they would have had, ponderings over what's just happened. You know, what is to come? What could this be leading to? Would they have realized that the clock was ticking, that things were in motion, and there was no stopping them? You know, the hindsight with which we might encounter such passages, I think we can fail to grasp just what it would have been like for them, as suddenly pieces are put together of the puzzle and suddenly things fall into place. I mean, there's the whole discourse regarding Jesus' prediction in Matthew that they would all fall away, that one by one they would do a runner, that one by one they would let him down and they wouldn't be there when crunch time came. You know, even Peter, in all his, he's adamant that he wouldn't. He would be the one who would stay the course. Jesus says, no, even you will actually deny knowing me 3 times. I just wonder, what must that have done to them mentally? You know, you've been with this guy, follow him for 3 years, and he's now saying, actually, you know, after all of this, you're not going to be able to stay the course. You who I've invested in, you who I've worked with, you who I've built this relationship, this friendship with. And was it a case maybe the penny's starting to drop, so to speak, that something is up for them? Something is happening. That the clock is ticking. Then there's Judas, maybe we could think about. In Matthew's account, by this point, as they head out to the Mount of Olives, you know, his departure's not recorded, but he's obviously slipped out at some point. There was that dialogue round the meal table. Jesus foretelling what is going to happen. That one of their own, someone who had been on that journey, someone who had witnessed the most amazing things, miracles that fed thousands, feet of wonder where storms were still, moments where healings and life was restored. You know, one of them was going to actually betray Jesus. And I wonder, you know, whenever Judas did step out into that evening air, as he left the upper room, you know, would the gravity of what was coming be slowly beginning to hit him? Was there a dawning realization, perhaps, of the part that he was playing, the choices that he had made? Maybe, maybe not. But just the path that he was heading on. You know, as he scurried off to meet with those who had paid him to hand over his rabbi, his teacher, his friend. You know, I wonder whether it would have been one of those experiences where you're kind of looking over your shoulder. There's that sense that someone's watching, that you're not alone, when probably you are. Maybe it's your conscience just niggling away at you at those times, bringing to the fore the choices that you've made. All the while, the clock is ticking. And as the disciples, they each declare their allegiance to Jesus. The fact that they will be sold out till the very end. Was it at that point maybe that Judas was arriving in the midst of the crowd that we read about? Verse 47 of Matthew 26, it says, with a large crowd armed with swords and clubs sent from the chief priests and the elder of the people, those who came to arrest Jesus. But before that confrontation, maybe as Judas initially gathered with those who were coming together, that large crowd, all ready for that mission in hand. You know, I don't regularly wander out with a sword or a club of an evening. Chances are they knew what they were doing. They were expecting a fight. Maybe some of them were looking for a fight. They were getting tooled up. They were ready to bust some skulls and go after someone. Maybe they didn't know who it really was. Maybe they didn't really care. But there's this picture of some guy who obviously needs to be brought in. Someone who needs to be taken to task. And still, the clock is ticking. And we could go on, because over the coming hours, we'll see Caiaphas, the high priest. He makes an appearance as Jesus is brought before him. We'll see Peter in his moment denying that he ever knew Jesus. Not just being one of the disciples who didn't turn up, but no, he turned up and actually denied anything to do with him. And that's all before Jesus is turned over to Pilate, who initially tries to palm the whole thing off on Herod, thinking, well, he can have it, but that doesn't work. So ultimately he washes his hands of the whole situation, but condemns Jesus to death. You might think about the soldiers who are going to, further down the line, they're going to be the ones who are going to flog and mock and hurl insults at Jesus. Where would they have been that night? Maybe in their barracks, maybe out, maybe relaxing. But all of this building up to that moment. as Jesus will be led out to be crucified. Because in all of this, the clock is ticking. The wheels are in motion, events are underway, moment following moment, as individuals begin to take up their positions, ready to follow the paths set out before them. As they each fulfill the roles the story is requiring of them to fill. Working towards that crescendo that is coming, because the clock is ticking. Now, the constant thread throughout all these different individuals, all these different situations, all these different goings on is Jesus. He is the thread throughout the coming hours, part of each encounter, each exchange. Yet I wonder whether we might sometimes see him simply being swept along by it all, caught up in all that's taking place around him, appearing to have no control over what goes on. He doesn't seem to be the one, maybe we might think, who is guiding things through. Once he's arrested, he's taken from here to there, he's led this way and that way, with little to say when questioned. You might think almost with the coming days, he might almost think, well, is hope lost? Is there anything really that's going to come? Is the momentum of the last 3 years, actually, was it just short-lived? Yet we must not forget that throughout it all, throughout the relentless ticking of that clock, of event following event, of moment following moment, we must never forget that Jesus, throughout it all, is sovereign. Jesus, throughout it all, never abdicates his position as the Son of God. Jesus never stops being who he is, who he has been, who he always will be. We mustn't forget that God's story didn't begin on Palm Sunday. That's not where it all started. That's not where the clock began to tick. It wasn't even at the beginning of Lent, or even back in, as we celebrate it in December, in that manger in Bethlehem. That wasn't the beginning of God's story. God's story is a reality that is beyond this world, beyond time as we know it. It's a story of God's love and his desire to know each and every one of us. One that led him to give his Son to walk the path that he did in our place. So whatever vantage point we might take of the Easter story, whatever perspective we might have over the coming days, in none of it, let us not lose sight or take for granted the master plan that is being outworked before us and for us. We don't just remember something that took place some 2,000 years ago. We celebrate something that is active and alive and impactful right now here in 2023 and beyond. Let me pray. Lord, I thank you for the fact that your story is bigger than this night. It's bigger than the events that we've reflected on today, we will tomorrow, or even across this week. Your story is bigger than something we can begin to grasp. And I thank you, Lord, for that opportunity to see you at work afresh. And I pray if maybe we've become familiar with this tale, I pray that you will reignite with us a passion and a desire to grow in you, to receive from you, and to experience the truth of this Easter afresh in a new and a powerful way, Lord. In your name we ask it.